The signal was a single, sustained beep, a sound that meant only one thing: total system failure. In the back of the unmarked Renault panel van, parked in a grimy alley in a Parisian suburb, the man known as Arik stared at the monitor. The screen, which moments ago had displayed the encrypted schematics of a gas flow centrifuge, was now a blank, mocking green. His partner, Dahlia, didn't need to ask what had happened. She was already stripping the wires from a backup power inverter, her fingers moving with a surgeon's precision. The air in the van was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt coffee. Outside, rain slicked the cobblestones. They had exactly 90 seconds before the target server would purge the data cache for good. This was their only window, a fleeting digital ghost they had spent 6 months and $3 million to chase. Arik glanced at his watch. The target, an Iraqi physicist named Dr. Fadi al-Hadithi, was meeting his mistress at a cafe 2 blocks away. The meeting was the pretext, a brief window where his personal laptop, left at his apartment, would be unattended. The laptop connected automatically to his private server, the server that held the core of Saddam's ambition. Dahlia grunted, a spark jumping from the inverter to her knuckle. Power fluctuation. The building's grid is dirty. We blew the primary fuse. Arik didn't waste time on blame. He toggled a switch on the communications array, opening a dead man's channel to their Overwatch team. Sparrowhawk, this is Raptor. We are dark. I repeat, we are dark. Abort window is 60 seconds. The voice that came back was unnaturally calm. Negative, Raptor. Asset is moving. He's leaving the cafe. You have 30 seconds, maybe less. Dahlia worked faster. Her breath held tight in her chest. She bypassed the blown fuse, connecting the primary power line directly to the motherboard of their decryption rig. It was a desperate, reckless move. It would either give them the power surge they needed or fry the entire system. It's this or nothing, she muttered, not looking at him. Arik watched the street on a small, grainy monitor, fed by a camera hidden in a street lamp. He saw Dr. al-Hadithi step out of the cafe, pulling his collar up against the rain. He was walking faster than anticipated. Arik's hand hovered over a small, red button beneath the console. Pushing it would trigger a thermite charge inside their rig, destroying a decade of intelligence work in a flash of white heat. It was the protocol for imminent capture. 20 seconds. Dahlia slammed the final connection into place. Now, she yelled. The lights on the console flickered violently. The main monitor flashed, sputtered, and then roared back to life. Lines of code scrolled across the screen at an impossible speed. A progress bar appeared. Data transfer. It jumped to 17%. Al-Hadithi was at the corner now, fumbling for his apartment keys. 10 seconds. It's not fast enough, Arik said, his voice flat. The progress bar hit 34%. He could see the entrance to the physicist's building. 5 seconds. Dahlia typed a command string, her fingers a blur. Overriding safety protocols. Rerouting all processing power to the download. A warning klaxon blared from the rig's speaker. The temperature gauge spiked into the red. 58%. The physicist was at the front door. 3 seconds. Arik's finger pressed down on the red button. 81%. The door was opening. He was inside. 99%. Transfer complete. The screen flashed in bold letters, just as the connection to the target server died. The van plunged into darkness again as the secondary fuse blew. Silence. Dahlia slumped back in her chair, her face pale in the emergency glow of a single red LED. Arik slowly lifted his finger from the thermite switch. They had it. They had the blueprint for Saddam Hussein's atomic bomb. But this success was not a conclusion. It was the terrifying beginning. The data confirmed the worst fears of Israeli intelligence. The Iraqi program was years ahead of projections. It was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a ticking clock. The data package from Paris, codenamed Midnight Promissory, landed on the desk of the director of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, at 0400 hours Tel Aviv time. He didn't need his analysts to decipher its meaning. The centrifuge designs were a direct copy of the Urenco G2 model, but with crucial modifications for enriching uranium to weapons-grade purity at an accelerated rate. The physicist, Al-Hadithi, was not just a theoretical scientist. He was an engineering mastermind. The report from the Paris Katsa, the field station chief, was stark. It concluded that Iraq, with the materials they had already covertly acquired from suppliers in Germany and Italy, could produce a viable nuclear device within 24 months. Not 10 years, not 5, 2. This intelligence directly contradicted the assessments from the CIA and MI6, who believed the Iraqi program was disorganized and technologically stunted. The Midnight Promissory data was the smoking gun that proved them wrong. An emergency meeting of the Committee of Heads of Services, colloquially known as the Forum, was convened. Present were the heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, and Amman, the Military Intelligence Directorate. The Prime Minister attended via secure video link, his face a grim mask. The head of Amman, a stern, analytical general, laid out the military options. An airstrike, similar to the 1981 Operation Opera that destroyed the Osirak reactor, was the most direct solution. But the new Iraqi facilities, including the main enrichment plant at Al-Qaim and the research center at Tuwaitha, were no longer single, vulnerable targets. They were dispersed, hardened, and buried deep underground. Satellite imagery showed a layered defense system of new French-made Roland surface-to-air missiles and Swiss-built anti-aircraft guns. A conventional air attack would result in heavy Israeli casualties and had a low probability of total success. Any surviving facility would allow Saddam to rebuild, this time with the full sympathy of the international community. The political fallout would be catastrophic. The Prime Minister was blunt. Another opera is not on the table. The Americans will not support it. The world will not tolerate it. Find me another way. The burden fell squarely on Dagan. His agency, the Mossad, was the only one with the mandate and the capability for a covert, non-military solution. The mission genesis was born from this single directive: cripple Saddam's nuclear program from the inside, without leaving a single Israeli fingerprint. The target could not be a building. It had to be the program itself, its supply chains, its personnel, its science. Dagan assembled a small, insulated planning group, known internally as Kidon, the Hebrew word for bayonet, the unit tasked with the most sensitive covert operations. He needed a team leader with a unique blend of field experience and psychological acumen. He chose Yael, a woman in her late 30s who had spent 5 years under deep cover in Damascus. Her official file listed her as a linguistics analyst, but her true achievement was the recruitment of a Syrian Air Force colonel, an operation that provided Israel with real-time intelligence during the First Lebanon War. Yael's skill was not in violence, but in identifying and exploiting the hidden fractures in a person's soul: greed, ego, resentment, love. Her second in command was Arik, the man from the Paris van. Arik was a technical operations specialist, a ghost who lived in the digital ether. His most significant past achievement was Operation Digital Mirage, where he successfully penetrated the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's internal communication network, feeding them falsified intelligence for 18 months, leading to the arrest of their own officers on charges of treason. Arik's skill was making the impossible possible in the world of signals and code. The final key player was a man known only as the pharmacist, a legend within the Mossad's research and development division, Mossad. He was responsible for creating the agency's exotic arsenal of poisons, specialized electronics, and sabotage devices. His greatest known success was a batch of seemingly normal construction materials sold to a Palestinian militant group. The materials contained a chemical agent that, when mixed to make concrete, slowly released a gas that caused severe disorientation and paranoia, leading the cell to implode from infighting before they could carry out a single attack. His job was to build the weapon that would win this war. The initial plan was to target the supply chain. Mossad agents, operating under commercial fronts, began buying up critical components on the international black market, outbidding Iraqi buyers or intercepting shipments. They successfully sabotaged a shipment of high-strength miraging steel from a German firm by having it replaced with substandard material that would fracture under the immense pressures of a centrifuge. They intercepted a shipment of Swiss-made vacuum pumps and had them subtly recalibrated to fail after approximately 500 hours of operation. But these were pinpricks. The Iraqis had dozens of suppliers and routes. For every shipment they stopped, 3 more got through. It was a losing battle of attrition. The focus then shifted to personnel. Key Iraqi scientists were targeted. One, a leading metallurgist, was killed in a car accident while attending a conference in Geneva. Another chose to defect after his family in London was approached by Mossad agents who presented him with an undeniable choice: a new life in the West, or the exposure of his secret collaboration with the program to his own government. But Saddam responded by placing his top scientists under the protection of the Mukhabarat, the brutal Iraqi intelligence service. They became virtual prisoners, their every move monitored. Direct access was cut off. It was Yael who proposed the third, most audacious strategy. They couldn't stop the supplies, and they couldn't get to all the scientists. So they would have to corrupt the very heart of the program's security. They needed to turn a high-ranking Iraqi official, someone with unquestioned access to the entire nuclear project, from its facilities to its personnel. The intelligence briefings shifted focus. Amman's Human Intelligence Division, Unit 5 FOPOR, began cross-referencing every known Iraqi military and intelligence officer with access to the program. They were looking for a vulnerability, a crack. After weeks of analysis, they found one. His name was General Amir Hamza al-Tikriti. He was a decorated hero of the Iran-Iraq War, a distant cousin of Saddam Hussein, and most importantly, the head of security for the entire Al-Qaim complex. On paper, he was untouchable, a loyal Ba'athist. But deep source intelligence, a rumor from a disgruntled Iraqi diplomat in Amman, painted a different picture. The general had a secret. He had a son who suffered from a rare, aggressive form of leukemia. The Iraqi state healthcare system had failed him. The best European clinics had told him there was nothing to be done. The general was a man watching his child die, a man who commanded legions, but was powerless to save his own son. This was the fracture Yael had been looking for. The mission had its name: Operation Damocles. The objective: seduce General al-Tikriti, not with money, not with ideology, but with the one thing he truly wanted: a cure for his son. It was a plan of breathtaking psychological cruelty and strategic genius. They weren't just going to sabotage a bomb. They were going to use a father's love as the trigger. The plan went into motion. The first step was to establish a credible, non-Israeli front. Kedon activated a long-dormant asset. A Belgian medical foundation called Cor Jesu, which specialized in providing experimental treatments for rare childhood cancers. The foundation was legitimate, with a real board of directors and a history of humanitarian work. What the board didn't know was that its primary donor was a shell corporation controlled by the Mossad. Phase 1 of the plan was contact. They couldn't simply approach the general. It had to be organic. He had to believe he was finding them. Arik's team went to work. They created a digital ecosystem of hope. They seeded medical forums and parent support groups with anecdotal stories of miraculous recoveries from leukemia, all subtly pointing back to the Cor Jesu Foundation and a revolutionary, unproven treatment protocol developed by a fictitious Dr. Lars Gunderson. They created a detailed online presence for Dr. Gunderson, including a fabricated history at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and published papers in obscure medical journals. These papers, written by top Israeli oncologists and vetted by the pharmacist, were filled with dense, plausible-sounding science. They were designed to convince a desperate, intelligent layman like the general. Simultaneously, a Mossad listening post tasked with monitoring the general's communications intercepted a query from his personal aide to a medical broker in Zurich. The general was still searching, still desperate. Now, they just had to guide him into their web. Yael orchestrated the next move from a safe house in Cyprus. A Kedon agent, posing as a representative of a Swiss pharmaceutical company, met with the Zurich broker. During the meeting, the agent casually mentioned the groundbreaking, though controversial work of the Cor Jesu Foundation. He presented it as a high-risk, high-reward option, something only a desperate parent would consider. The bait was set. 2 weeks later, the listening post picked up what they were waiting for. A heavily encrypted email from the general's office to the public contact address for the Cor Jesu Foundation. The subject line was a single word: inquiry. The plan moved to phase 2. The hook. The foundation responded politely, stating that Dr. Gunderson's protocol was highly experimental and that they had a long waiting list. They were not seeking new patients. This was crucial. The offer had to be exclusive, a prize to be won, not a service to be bought. The general, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, responded with increasing urgency. He offered to pay any price. He used his official influence, having the Iraqi ambassador in Brussels contact the foundation directly. Each appeal was met with polite, bureaucratic refusal. Yael was manufacturing scarcity, turning the cure into a priceless artifact. While the psychological game unfolded, Arik and his technical team were preparing the battlefield. They needed a secure location for the eventual meeting, a place they could control completely. They chose Rome. Using another front company, they purchased a private clinic that had recently gone bankrupt. Over the course of a month, the pharmacists' teams swarmed the building. It was a complete technological overhaul. The entire clinic was wired for sound and video. Microphones, no larger than a grain of rice, were embedded in the walls. Fiber optic cameras were placed behind light fixtures and inside medical equipment. The HVAC system was fitted with filters capable of analyzing airborne particles for traces of explosives or chemical agents. The heart of the system was the main observation room, located in the sub-basement behind a lead-lined wall. It was a sterile, cold space filled with monitors, from which Yael would run the operation. The technology served a dual purpose. First, security. Every inch of the clinic would be monitored. Second, manipulation. The lighting, the temperature, even the faint hum of the medical equipment could be subtly adjusted from the observation room to heighten the general's anxiety or foster a sense of calm. The most critical piece of tech was what Arik called the Oracle. It was a real-time voice analysis software linked to a database containing every known recording of the general's voice, from public speeches to intercepted phone calls. The software analyzed his speech patterns, cadence, and micro-tremors to provide Yael with a constant, color-coded readout of his emotional state. Green for calm, yellow for stress, red for deception or extreme agitation. It was a lie detector on steroids. After 6 weeks of calculated rejection, Yael decided the general was ready. The Core Jizu Foundation contacted his office with a sudden, unexpected offer. Dr. Gunderson had reviewed the case file of the general's son. He was intrigued by the unique cellular markers of the boy's disease. He was willing to make an exception. A preliminary consultation could be arranged in Rome. There was one non-negotiable condition. Due to the sensitive nature of the experimental treatment, the general had to come alone. No aides, no security detail. The general agreed immediately. He was walking into a trap, but he believed he was walking toward a miracle. The first major setback occurred 48 hours before the scheduled meeting. A source within Italian intelligence, the AISE, sent a cryptic, back-channel warning to the Mossad station in Rome. The message was just 2 words. Carthage awakens. Carthage was the Mossad's code name for a rival intelligence unit, a highly secretive branch of French intelligence, the DGSE. The French had their own interests in Iraq, primarily massive oil and arms contracts. They had a vested interest in maintaining the stability of Saddam's regime. The warning meant the French knew something was happening in Rome. They might not have known the specifics, but their presence turned the controlled environment of the clinic into a potential powder keg. Arik's team swept the clinic again, this time looking for French surveillance devices. They found one, a sophisticated laser microphone aimed at the main consultation room window from a building across the street. The French were listening. Panic began to ripple through the team. The standard protocol would be to abort the mission. A compromised meeting was an unacceptable risk. But Yael refused. They were too close. She saw the French presence not as a threat, but as an opportunity. She made a call to Dagan in Tel Aviv, outlining a new, high-risk gambit. They would let the French listen. They would stage a fake first act for them. The plan was adjusted. The real meeting would not take place in the consultation room. It would happen in the MRI suite in the basement, a room naturally shielded by tons of concrete and steel, impervious to outside eavesdropping. For the French laser microphone, they would put on a show. 2 Keydon agents, a man and a woman fluent in Iraqi-accented Arabic, would play the roles of the general and a foundation doctor. Their script, written by Yael, would be a bland, technical discussion about leukemia treatments, ending with the doctor concluding that the boy's case was too advanced for their protocol. The French would overhear a medical consultation that failed, conclude the meeting was a dead end, and hopefully stand down. It was a dangerous piece of theater. If the French detected the deception, the entire operation could unravel. The second setback was more personal and potentially more catastrophic. On the morning of the general's arrival, the man chosen to play the role of Dr. Lars Gunderson suffered a massive heart attack. He was a veteran Mossad agent, a silver-haired man with a calming bedside manner, chosen for his resemblance to the fabricated photos of the doctor. He was now in a real hospital in a coma. The mission was hours away, and they had lost their leading man. There was no time to fly in a replacement. Every member of the team was a specialist. Spies, technicians, soldiers. None of them were actors capable of impersonating a world-renowned oncologist while being scrutinized by a desperate, intelligent, and highly suspicious Iraqi general. In the frantic atmosphere of the command room, Arik, the tech specialist, made an unprecedented suggestion. There is no Dr. Gunderson. He's a ghost in the machine. So let's keep him that way. He proposed a radical idea. The general would not meet Dr. Gunderson in person. He would be told the doctor was immunocompromised due to his work with aggressive cell lines and could only consult via a high-definition video conference. This would solve the problem of not having an actor. Better yet, it would allow Yael to be Dr. Gunderson. Using real-time voice morphing software linked to the Oracle, Yael could speak, and the computer would transform her voice into a synthetic, male, Swedish-accented voice they had already created for the digital ghost. She could watch the general's every flicker of emotion on her monitors and adjust her approach in real time, a level of control she would never have with an agent in the room. It was a technical and psychological gamble of the highest order. The slightest glitch in the software, a momentary lag, an unnatural turn of phrase could expose the entire deception. But they had no other choice. The stage was set for a meeting between a heartbroken father and a digital phantom, a conversation that would decide the fate of a nation's nuclear ambitions, all while a rival spy agency listened in to a carefully crafted lie. General Al-Takriti arrived at the clinic at precisely 1400 hours. He was a tall, imposing man in a tailored civilian suit, but his eyes, deep set and shadowed, betrayed a profound exhaustion. A Kaidan agent, playing the role of a clinic administrator, greeted him in the lobby. As planned, two other agents, disguised as a doctor and nurse, entered the main consultation room and began their scripted performance for the French listening device. The administrator led the general to a different elevator, one that went directly to the sub-basement MRI suite. The room was sterile, white, and dominated by the massive, humming cylinder of the MRI machine. On the wall was a large, high-definition screen. "Dr. Gunderson will be with you shortly," the administrator said, before leaving and locking the door behind him. In the observation room next door, Yael sat before a console, a headset over her ears. On one screen, she saw the general's face in crisp detail. On another, the Oracle's software was already analyzing his baseline emotional state. A third screen showed the live feed of the fake meeting upstairs. Arik stood behind her, monitoring the voice morphing software. "He's nervous, but controlled," Yael murmured. "The Oracle shows elevated cortisol markers. He's trying to project authority." She took a breath and activated her microphone. On the screen in the MRI suite, the face of Dr. Gunderson appeared. It was a computer-generated image, subtly animated to match the cadence of Yael's speech. "General Al-Takriti," the synthesized Swedish voice began, "thank you for your patience. I am Dr. Gunderson. I apologize for this impersonal arrangement, but the nature of my research requires extreme precautions." The general nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Doctor, I will do whatever is necessary." Yael began the conversation, following a carefully structured path. She spent 20 minutes discussing the technical details of his son's illness, using the exact terminology from the boy's medical files, which Mossad had obtained weeks earlier. She was building credibility, proving her expertise. The oracle stayed in the yellow zone. The general was tense, but engaged. Then, Yael shifted tactics. "General, your son's condition is, as you know, exceptionally aggressive. The standard therapies, they are like using a garden hose to fight a forest fire." The general's posture stiffened. "My government has provided the best possible care. The care of a state is not the love of a father," Yael replied, the synthesized voice softening almost imperceptibly. "I have read your file, but I want to hear from you, as a father. Tell me about your boy." The oracle flickered toward green. She had found the right key. For the next hour, the general spoke. He talked about his son, his love for building model airplanes, his fear of the dark. He was no longer a general of the Republican Guard. He was just a father. Yael listened, guiding him, letting him pour out the grief and helplessness he could show nowhere else. This was the core of the seduction. Not a transaction, but a manufactured, intimate confession. While Yael worked on the general, the play upstairs concluded. The fake doctor expressed his regrets to the fake general, and the two actors left the room. On their surveillance feed, the Mossad team watched the French agents across the street pack up their laser microphone and leave. The first gambit had worked. Now, everything rested on Yael. Finally, she brought the conversation back to the treatment. "There is a chance, General, a small one. My protocol is radical. It involves genetic resequencing, something no other clinic in the world will attempt. It is dangerous. It could fail, but it is a chance. I will take it," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. "What do you need?" This was the moment of transaction. The treatment is complex. It requires materials that are difficult to source, specifically certain radioactive isotopes for the gene targeting phase. They are not commercially available. Yael let the silence hang in the air. The general's face was a mask of confusion. Isotopes? What kind? "The kind your nation is producing at the Al-Qaim facility," Yael said, her voice now flat, clinical. The oracle flashed bright red. The general shot to his feet, his face transformed by rage and understanding. "Who are you? Is this a trick?" "This is not a trick, General. This is a choice." On the screen, the face of Dr. Gunderson was replaced by a satellite photograph. It was a high-resolution image of the Al-Qaim nuclear facility. Another image appeared. A close-up of the main entrance, with the general's own armored car parked outside. Then, a final image. A recent, candid photograph of his son, sitting by a hospital window. "You have access to what we need." Yael's voice-morphed persona continued. "Small quantities of processed uranium hexafluoride, not enough to be missed. We can provide you with the specialized containers. It would be undetectable." The general stared at the screen, his breathing ragged. "You are Israeli intelligence." It was not a question. "We are doctors," Yael countered. "We are offering your son the only medicine that can save him. The source of that medicine is irrelevant. The only question you must answer is this: what is the life of your son worth?" She had him cornered, trapped between loyalty to his state and love for his child. He paced the small room like a caged animal. "Even if I did this, how? The security is absolute. I designed it." "We know," Yael said. "Which is why you are the only one who can do it. We will guide you. We have a plan. But first, you must agree. You must make a choice, General. Your regime or your son." The general stood silent for a full 2 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the MRI machine. Finally, he collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. "Tell me what I have to do," he whispered. Yael looked at Arik. She had him. Operation Damocles had its asset. The moment of truth arrived at 10 o'clock on a moonless night. Inside the Al-Qaim enrichment facility, General Al-Tikriti began his final, critical walk. He moved through the cavernous hall, a space filled with the humming chorus of thousands of centrifuges spinning at supersonic speeds. His security detail kept their distance, just as they always did. It was a routine inspection, and no one had any reason to suspect otherwise. Just after 10:30, as he neared Cascade 7, he began to cough. It was a dry, racking sound that was quickly swallowed by the immense chamber. He leaned against the support structure for the main gas feed lines, his body a perfect shield from the prying eyes of the security cameras. His hand slipped into his jacket, his fingers closing around the disguised radiation dosimeter. In a Mossad communications van 30 kilometers away, Arik watched a silent stream of data from an overhead satellite. Suddenly, he saw it. A brief, specific flicker in the facility's electronic emissions. He spoke into his headset, his voice tight. "Pulse is active. The window is open." 60 seconds. In that single, critical minute, the general's hand, trembling only slightly, brought the disguised inhaler to the valve stem. A press of the plunger released an invisible vapor. 15 seconds had passed. He pocketed the device and stumbled away, still coughing, a man overwhelmed by the dry air. 45 seconds gone. He waved off his approaching guards, indicating he just needed a moment. Exactly 1 minute after it began, the electronic blind spot vanished. In the control room, the pressure readings for Cascade 7 glowed a steady green. All normal. A few minutes later, the general composed himself and calmly resumed his inspection tour. He had just committed an act of high treason and no one had seen a thing. His part was done. Now came the escape. The plan was to meet a Kaidan team in the western desert for extraction by helicopter. But as the general's car cleared the facility gates, the plan shattered. A convoy of Republican Guard vehicles, sirens silent, sped past him, heading toward the facility. Up ahead, another convoy was blocking the road, the Mukhabarat. Someone had talked. The trap was closing. A frantic message was relayed to Yael's command post in Cyprus. "The exfiltration is compromised. He's boxed in." Yael stared at the map, her mind racing. Standard procedure was to abandon the asset. But she had made a promise. "Divert him," she ordered. "Route 4B. Tell him to head for the phosphate mine at Acaciat. There's an old smuggler's airstrip there." "It hasn't been used in years," Arik protested over the comms. "We have no team there." "Get a team there," Yael shot back. "And get me a pilot who can land a plane on a dirt road in the dark." The climax had shifted. It was no longer about sabotage. It was now a desperate race against time. The general's car swerved onto a dusty desert track, his headlights cutting a lonely path into the darkness, the horns of the Mukhabarat pursuit vehicles screaming behind him. The immediate fallout of Operation Damocles was chaotic and contradictory. At 01:47 a.m., alarms began screaming in the Al-Qaim control room. Monitors for Cascade 7 showed a cascading series of rotor failures and pressure drops. Technicians initially reported a critical malfunction in the cooling system. By the time they realized the uranium hexafluoride gas was leaking, it was too late. The corrosive gas had been sucked into the delicate machinery of over 1,000 centrifuges. The high-speed rotors, precision balanced to within a fraction of a millimeter, began to wobble and disintegrate, setting off a chain reaction of catastrophic mechanical failures. Within an hour, Cascade 7, the heart of Iraq's weapons-grade enrichment effort, was a twisted wreck of scrap metal, contaminated with radioactive gas. The Iraqis sealed the hull, but the damage was done. It would take them years and billions of dollars to rebuild, if they ever could. The official explanation from Baghdad was a tragic industrial accident caused by faulty foreign components. They publicly blamed the German company that had supplied the miraging steel, the same company the Mossad had targeted in their earlier supply chain attacks. It was the perfect cover story. The sabotage was a complete success. The extraction, however, was a nightmare. The Saddam team, diverted at the last minute, reached the abandoned Akashad airstrip just minutes before the general. The pilot, a former Israeli Air Force commando flying a stripped-down Pilatus PC-6 Porter, a plane renowned for its short takeoff and landing capabilities, made a harrowing landing on the unlit, rock-strewn strip using only night vision goggles. As the general sprinted from his car toward the waiting plane, the first of the Mukhabarat vehicles crested a nearby ridge, their headlights illuminating the scene. Gunfire erupted. The Saddam team laid down covering fire as they dragged the general aboard the plane. The pilot pushed the throttle to the firewall, and the small plane clawed its way into the air, its fuselage peppered with bullet holes from the pursuing Iraqi soldiers. They made it across the Jordanian border with less than 5 minutes of fuel to spare. The mission was, by all metrics, a success. The Iraqi nuclear program had been set back by a decade. The asset was successfully extracted. The world suspected nothing. General al-Takriti was reunited with his wife and son in a secure location in Israel. The boy began receiving the best available legitimate cancer treatment. Not a miracle cure, but the real, painful, and arduous process of chemotherapy and radiation under the care of world-class oncologists. The general, stripped of his identity, began a new, quiet life. But the story did not end there. This is where the final, crucial revelation recontextualizes the entire operation. The true genius of Yael's plan was never the sabotage of Cascade 7. That was merely a bonus, a spectacular piece of misdirection. The real objective of Operation Damocles was revealed 6 months later. Following the accident at Al-Qaim, Saddam Hussein, now paranoid and furious, launched a brutal internal purge. Convinced that the catastrophic failure was the result of treason, he had the Mukhabarat arrest over 300 scientists, engineers, and military personnel connected to the nuclear program. The man leading the investigation was the new head of security for the project, a fiercely loyal but deeply unimaginative colonel who saw spies in every shadow. The purges were based on flimsy evidence, forced confessions, and Saddam's own paranoia. Among those arrested and executed was Dr. Fadi al-Hadithi, the brilliant physicist from Paris, the true mastermind of the program. Also executed were the top 5 metallurgists, the 2 leading centrifuge engineers, and the entire senior management team of the Tuwaitha Research Center. Saddam, in a fit of rage, had dismantled his own nuclear program more effectively than any airstrike or act of sabotage ever could. He had eliminated the one thing Israel could never touch: the irreplaceable human knowledge, the brain trust of the entire project. The seduction of General al-Takriti was not about gaining access to a valve. It was about planting a seed of doubt in the mind of a tyrant. The Mossad didn't just break a machine. They turned Saddam's own paranoia into the ultimate weapon. The final piece of intelligence, the legacy of the operation, was a single, intercepted communication from the new head of the Iraqi program to Saddam's office. It was a report stating that due to a critical loss of senior personnel, the project was being put on indefinite hold. Yael, reading the report in her Tel Aviv office, underlined a single sentence. We no longer possess the expertise to move forward. The real bomb they had been trying to stop was never the physical device. It was the knowledge required to build it. And now, that knowledge was gone, buried in the unmarked graves of Saddam's own making. The cure offered to the general was a lie, but it had saved more lives than any real medicine ever could.